All right. First, I suppose, can everybody hear me? Everything's loud enough? Okay. We are about to embark upon my first artist lecture, my second PowerPoint presentation ever. Apparently, we don't do slides anymore. And so let's see how it goes. I thought I would start off with a brief introduction to myself, a consolidated life story. I was born in Santa Barbara, California, 1975, into an orphanage, was quickly adopted after a few months, grew up in the Ventura County, normal stuff that kids do, Boy Scouts, learned how to ride motorcycles when I was 9. Lots of camping. I suppose what pertains to you guys wanting to hear a lecture from an artist would be the why did I start painting question. In high school, I had a teacher, Mrs. Kalel, that quickly saw that I was not so much interested in normal high school stuff, and she took me in, pulled some strings, and had me to sit in the art class all day for high school. That was great. She was pampering me and prepping me to go to the art center in Pasadena, a kind of fancy and I believe reputable art school. And that's what was going to happen. I chose something else instead. We'll get to that here in a little bit. What happened after high school was a life on the road, and after painting a little bit of painting, a lot of drawing, a lot of devoting all my time and energy to artwork in high school, I got the bug to travel, and I left everything. I kind of youthfully and romantically lit everything I owned on fire and walked away. Started hitchhiking. I learned how to ride freight trains. That was pretty rad. Traveled all around the country for about eight years. During that time, I kind of chose writing as my medium. It was easy to carry books, to read other books. It's easy to carry a journal. I put a lot of time and energy into that. I gave myself a 5 pages a day rule, be it letters, poems, journals. I dabbled around in photography, but this was before cell phones and digital cameras, so every time you click the button, that's $1. So I didn't go too far with photography. On a couple road trips, I would stop and work when I ran out of money, and during some of those times I kind of dabble back around in painting. One particular time in Eugene, Oregon, I dabbled around with oil paintings for the first time, quite clumsily to begin with. I didn't know you had to mix them with mediums. I squeezed the paint right out and painted it on. I don't think it ever dried. So I went to the library and did some research and learned a little bit about how you're supposed to do it. And I'm going to show this slide because this is what I consider to be my first oil painting. It's of a buddy of mine, Simon. We were living in Prague trying to expatriate in the Czech Republic. He succeeded. I ran out of money after a month and had to leave. And I feel like this painting worked out fairly well. It was just sort of a successful experiment in oil paints, and the first venture into what I think still comes through in my paintings, which is darkness, a little bit of non-desperate sadness, pushing paints and having semi-fictional backgrounds. What else do I want to talk about here? So life on the road was coming to an end. I was developing a guilt complex for sleeping on other people's sofas. And I had a particularly miserable freight train ride from Pocatello to Portland. It was late in the fall. I was massively underprepared. I'm pretty sure I had hypothermia. I did jumping jacks all night to stay warm. The train pulled into the wrong yard in Portland. So it was about 13 miles from the neighborhood I was trying to get to. I started walking down the tracks towards that house. It was raining. I decided to sleep in this abandoned shack. I woke up covered in spiders, wrapped myself in a tarp, got on a city bus into town, and decided that I would go back to school. So, now I change to the next slide. I am showing you these two paintings. I thought it would be important to share with you my two favorite paintings ever. First one down here at the bottom right, Lady with an Ermine, Leonardo da Vinci. What I love about it is for one, just the remarkable rendering, the power of that very simple composition, and how just a single shot picture with a black background can still create movement in the canvas. There's the power of her gaze. There's the contribution to this in the history of portraiture. I don't know how to prove it or if it's necessarily 100% true, but this is, if not the first, at least a very early example of three-quarter portraiture. Before that, portraits were either dead on or side profiles. And another one above here is it's called Melancholia. Edgar Degas never gave it a title. He probably would have called it Lady in a Chair or something like that. And this is my other favorite painting. It's the emotional reading in that face is unmatched. That's another amazing yet simple composition. And I think what really gets me is the amount of information within a minimal amount of brushstrokes. And what that tells me is the power that paint can deliver as either a storyteller or a conveyor of information. The chair, like this whole chair, is defined by just one black brushstroke. This painting also began my still running obsession with and love for cadmium red, a color which I hear they're not going to make anymore, which is horrible news. So I now hoard it and buy all of the cadmium red every time I'm at an art store. I think we go next. So the decision to go back to school, I went to Lane Community College in Eugene, Oregon, for two reasons. One, because when I lived on the road and my driver's license had expired, I happened to be in Oregon, so I got an Oregon driver's license. So, and when I had made the decision to go back to school, I still had an Oregon driver's license, and they didn't ask me any questions about residency, so I didn't have to pay out-of-state tuition. The other reason is that there was this guy, Adam Grosowski, was a teacher at Lane Community College, and I really enjoy his work, and realized or learned that he teaches the technique, even though it maybe doesn't necessarily show in his work, but the technique he teaches is the classical Renaissance glazing technique. So you build up layers, you think of a painting as a skeleton that you slowly clothe with different colored layers, using transparent paints. Some of the underlayers show through, and that's what I wanted to learn how to do. So I latched onto him and took every single class that he taught. There was some, so sort of deciding how much to say as we go here. Yeah, he was I'll just leave it at that. He was a very influential teacher. The next few slides will show that. So this is a painting I made in community college. it was my first time getting oil instruction, and if we could see more of Adam's work, it's very obvious his influence on me at the time. I was learning to loosen up, to show brush strokes. This is begins my love of like figurative work. I took figure drawing classes back then. I was going to outside figure drawing sessions, doing about 9 hours a week for about 5 years during my study. This was like I was using new colors, learning how colors work, learning glazing from Adam. This is another one we did in class. This is early student work. And I think what was happening for me was getting this theme, so this like sort of melancholy theme, portraiture, darkness, looking for an emotional reading out of paintings. But what I hadn't done, and I don't think it took me a while to get ready to do it, was break out of the window effect. So a painting is trickery. It's not real. It's a two-dimensional thing, and you're trying to fool somebody into. Well, if you're doing the kind of painting I'm doing, you're trying to fool somebody into thinking that it's three-dimensional. And the window effect is trying to do that as if the rectangle or the square is a portal that you're looking through upon one single scene. And we'll the breaking of the window effect, we'll get to that here in a little while. I was also looking at more and different artwork stuff besides my early influences of like Van Gogh and Dali and that kind of stuff. I was ignorant and judgmental back then, so I thought abstract art meant that you just didn't actually know how to paint, and so you found some niche that made sales and just did that. But it was in school, and it was good for me. I was opening up. I was looking at Franz Klein as an artist that really changed things for me. It's his work has a look of Japanese calligraphy, but it was abstract. And Adam actually had taught me how to appreciate some of the characteristics that you would find in any painting, figurative, Renaissance, anything in these abstract works. So the idea that as I was growing, learning new things. Then community college ended, I finished, and I moved up to Portland. This is in Oregon. Portland State University was where I went. And this was one of our homework assignments. We went on a trip to Italy for 2 weeks to go to the Uffizi and other museums like that. And we were supposed to come back and make a painting about our trip. I did this, and this is where I feel like I reached my limits with being Adam's student, and I wanted to kind of find my own voice. Looking at the piece on the left, it's not to say I don't like it and don't think that there's some successes in that, but I realize that I'm no Raphael, I'm no Dante, so I don't even want to throw myself into this world or into competition with these people. So what's going to be my own voice? In painting, I met this teacher who carried me through my second half of school. This is Horia Boboya. And while we were sitting in Italy in a plaza, he was watching me doodle in a notebook, and he goes, "Yeah, you can." He's like, "You have some drawing skills, but so what?" It's like, what are you trying to say? What's the point? If you're just trying to mimic nature, we have photography to do that. If you are trying to say something, like some one particular thing, we have writing for that. So he kind of shook me up a little bit, and was, I think, my first time not being pampered by a teacher. Like I would give him assignments, and he's like, it's okay. So, and it wound up being good because he really pushed me to what ultimately wound up just being my own voice. This series. So at this point in my education as well, we were basically just given a studio and asked to create a series of paintings, and we do 2 or 3 of those a year, with Horia and the other faculty just overseeing it and doing critiques with us. This was the first series for me that I made an effort to break up the window effect and to make paintings where it's not just one scene that you're looking on. So there's several vanishing points, several planes, different spaces. I revisited writing, but I did it with writing into the paintings. And I think with this one going for, I hadn't quite gotten to storytelling yet, but going for an emotional read based off of imagery. And push that a little more. This was like one of the paintings from the second body of work in school. This one, I think, finally maybe breaking that window effect, even sometimes turning the painting sideways just to make sure that there wasn't one particular scene. Was trying to use subtlety as a tool, coded and mysterious narrative, and this idea of these were the first thoughts that a painting doesn't have to be what I want it to be, and if I use vague enough imagery, the viewer can inject their own opinion or experience or story upon the painting, and it can actually have multiple meanings, which is something I'm still interested in. Also in school, I did try different mediums. I took some printmaking classes, sculpture classes. Ultimately, what happened is it just, those are just things that helped me understand painting a little bit better. And so I made a conscious effort to stick with painting. In school, this is getting towards the end of school, things were going pretty well, I suppose, as a not young in years, but young and experienced artist could hope for. Through this body of work, I had gotten into a gallery. I had gallery representation in Portland. I had met an art dealer that was coming to visit me in my studio and then selling paintings in Washington, Oregon, Northern California. This was, for lack of better terms, old Portland when rent was cheap, and I had the whole upstairs of an unfinished upstairs of a house for $250 a month, so that's all I had to come up with for the month. So I was actually surviving as an artist. It was pretty exciting. I didn't go to Skagway to work that summer. And then the housing market crashed, and people stopped buying art, and my dealer quit, and the gallery closed, and I got tired of the scene of running around and trying to be an artist and trying to get shows, and watching a show 2 doors down that was some airbrush circles completely sell out, and I would have a show that I poured my heart into for 9 months and wouldn't sell one painting. And I ran away to Skagway. In 2007, I moved to Skagway full time. And where are we at? Okay. Sorry, I've been trying to balance talking and looking over and pushing this button. So there's another painting from school. So arriving in Skagway, it was good. It was what I needed in my life. It didn't by any means help my career as an artist, but it was good for me. I needed to simplify, have a quiet life, where the important things are like get to the grocery store on Tuesday because that's when the barge comes in, or okay, you have to chop enough wood, or do I have enough layers for this winter. It was easy. It was just simple life. I kept painting. I tried a new series. I tried this series. There's one here, and here it's painting blurry photographs, and the idea was to question how humans view the landscape. So I love being in Alaska, and I'm here mostly because of the landscape and the quiet and simple life. But how much can I enjoy the landscape? If it's like this outside, would I just sit outside and paint? So probably not. So I spent some time in the winter driving around in really bad weather and sticking the camera out the car and taking pictures. I made a series of paintings about that. Pretty fun. But I was painting and this is another thing about Skagway too. So studio space is tricky. At this time I was painting in my friend Abby Jo's shed that was uninsulated and about 3 feet by 4 feet. So the paintings were small. I had a brief spell in Northern California that got me a little bit reinvigorated about art, or revisiting the idea of showing and being in galleries. There was a gallery called the 1078 Gallery, where I had my first solo show since living in Portland. And that was exciting, and I've kept at it since then. In fact, trying to work hard to find spaces to paint bigger, and doing things like submitting for shows at the Alaska State Museum. And so, yeah, continuing life as a painter in Skagway. This is my current studio. It's about 10 feet by 12 feet in the back of a wood shop. I have a door to keep the dust out. There's a little Toyo heater, because this is also the guy who owns the wood shop. This is where he stores his paints and varnishes, so he keeps the space at 50 degrees. So that's nice, it doesn't freeze. I wrote down that I was going to talk a little bit about the difficulties of getting materials in Skagway. But I'm in Juneau, like I'm probably preaching to the choir, so we know how that is. We're going to skip that. This does bring us to now in this particular show. So I'll spend the rest of my talk talking about this particular show. This show, it was the first time I made a series of paintings that collectively tell one story. That was new and exciting for me. I'm not going to say I'm going to do that from now on. I'll probably do it again because it's pretty fun. And I really wanted to push this collage style with this show, this layering of different and often multi-themed images into one painting, watching what those images do, and how if you put, say, a man with a buffalo head in this particular painting, it's going to read differently than if I put a man in a buffalo head in this other painting. That kind of stuff was fun to play with. I did write for the museum like what I'm calling a brief introduction. So it's as much as I want to tell about the story about these paintings, because to revisit something I mentioned earlier, part of the fun for me of a painting is knowing that the viewer doesn't know everything about the painting. And even using the word knowing is funny, because it's like I know what I'm thinking is going on with the painting while I'm painting it, but I don't even know necessarily that that's really what the painting is. It's my interpretation of it, and it's a thing that I'm thinking about when I'm doing it. So with that vague introduction, what I wrote here was, in the paintings over there in the gallery, there is one narrative that does run through them all. So I decided to write that down, and about two of the other things that are going on in those paintings. So I'll just read to you for right now. This body of work is built around a chronological story, an ancient myth, and several subplots interwoven through all the paintings and at times exclusive to specific works. The main story is that of a woman on a quest to find her ancestral language. She leaves her birthplace at age 27, is beckoned by a raven to embark upon the journey. The raven tells her that many generations ago, her home and culture were destroyed by an invading force. Her people had been forgotten, her language lost. The raven speaks of a being in the forest who can help, but that the journey will not be easy. The journey spans her entire life, moving in phases throughout the paintings. She begins inspired and confident. She finds clues, a ring, a frog guide, an animal that offers itself as food, and other coded imagery. She spends a period of time in reflection, alone on a beach, quiet. She delves into mysticism, placing meaning upon the natural world around her. She is confronted with tragedy and hardship, then finds laughter and absurdity at the other end. She leaves the water and heads into the forest. For a time, she feels the ache of loss, the heavy heart that comes with memories, a longing for the love and life she left behind. She carries on. In the forest, she finds the teacher. Here she spends some time learning an applicable form of magic and the mystical arts, mastering her physical body and its role as a vehicle. She is now 52 years old. Leaving her teacher behind, she ventures deeper into the forest. She builds a home amongst the trees and learns to communicate with them. The trees speak openly of her ancestral home and of her people. They tell her of the many outsiders that have moved through since then and of the many outsiders that came through long before her ancestors arrived. In the forest, she feels content. It is here that she grows old and spends the remainder of her days in her physical body. At the moment of death, aged to 142, she looks to the stars, to the sky, to the impossibly large openness above our firm ground, and rests comfortably in knowing how she came to be. Each painting is assigned one of the 9 Greek muses. The mythology associated with each muse is used to accompany the imagery, interacting with the story of the woman and her journey. It could be said that her adult life is composed of 9 phases, each phase being overseen by a muse. The imagery in each of these paintings speaks to both the story of the woman and to the mythology of the muse, as well as to the sub-story that arises when combining these 2 different concepts into one space. Making appearances in each of the paintings and embarking upon a journey of its own is the raven. Ever present, the raven is the harbinger, and the reaper, the delivery, and the hospice. So yeah, that's a little piece I wrote about this show. I was thinking, there we go. So in constructing this lecture, and which with much checking in with my partner, trying to find out what do people want to hear about. So now we'll go through each of the paintings, and I'll talk a little bit about them. Again, I don't want to give away too much. What I thought might be fun would be to take you through one of the paintings beginning to end. And I could talk about each of the steps in as much as seems appropriate. I'll look for the glazed over look and keep moving. So I start my paintings, I build my own canvases for several reasons. One, the most important one being that I can make them any size I want. Secondly, you can't buy canvases in Skagway. Third, I suppose even if you could buy canvases, a 7-foot by 4-foot painting like you saw in the gallery, that blank canvas would probably cost about $400. I can build it for $25. I start with lumber from our wonderful Skagway hardware store, which means I buy about a third more lumber than I need. I set it in the shop and I let it dry. Then I pull the straight boards out after that. I build the rectangles. I don't do anything too fancy with the joinery because the stretched canvas over it holds it together. Lay out the canvas. and I thought I might mention this. This particular show, with the exception of the two small squares, are golden rectangles. So the proportions were chosen very specifically. The golden ratio being 1 to 1.618. It's a rectangle where if you make a square, the remainder of the rectangle is the same proportion as the entire rectangle. And brace them as needed. I move into my studio. I use gesso to prime the canvases. Most often, I'll start with one main character and burnt sienna, and that's how I do my drawing. I'll add some stuff that sometimes will disappear. There was a helmet in the top left corner that I decided wasn't working later on. Some of the washy stuff on the sides is just because I needed to not be a blank canvas, because blank canvases terrify me. And also at the end of the day, rather than letting my paint dry up, I'll wipe it off the palette and just throw it at the painting to take up some white space. I hadn't really decided what else to do, so I was sticking with the figure for a little while, sort of honing in on the proportions, the initial ideas of costume design. If I am going to use clothing, I like to just design my own clothing. I often don't use clothing, or I guess a better way to put it would be, if I don't think the clothing or the costume is going to contribute to the narrative of the story, I would just as soon leave clothing out of the picture. So this is somebody who wears Carhartts and hoodies trying to design an outfit. The circles make appearances in all these paintings. I'm starting to put characters in there. I don't personally think it's weird, so I won't say that it's a weird obsession, except that it is a weird obsession with the doodles that monks would put in the margins of Bibles. And so I sneak those into a lot of my paintings. And that's the knight with the riding on the horse that has a lion-human hybrid face. The painting developing. Oh, that washed out spot there is a window in my studio, which some people say so it's great, you have natural light. I find it tremendously annoying because it ruins the light that I have set up in my studio. Some of this stuff is getting rid of paint at the end of the day. It often has effects that I really enjoy, so different layers of mineral spirits running down and disturbing the pigments underneath. I think that stuff's cool, and I'll often leave it because I like the way it looks. She needed a raven on her foot because that's what was missing. I'm pushing them along. I had to establish some sort of ground. A lot of this stuff at this point is compositional elements. Sometimes this character adds to the story. Facial tattoos are fun, just to further complicate the narrative. This is Terpsichore in the background. It's a famous Greek statue. I'm just making a painting of it to reference the muse for the painting. Working on the mouth. I'm going to paraphrase because I don't know the quote exactly, but it was John Singer Sargent who said, "A portrait is nothing but a painting with something a little bit wrong with the corners of the mouth." So I'm trying to get that straight. I think it did work out in the end. Painting's coming along. Changing my mind on colors. Background was better dark. I work, so all these paintings are brought up together So we worked on them for 7 months, and so when you saw the stage that was, say, the drawing underneath, I did drawings on all the paintings, either that day or that week. So they're all brought up together, and I have to choose my moods because I work full time. I play in bands. I'm part of charitable organizations. I do radio shows. So when I do get time to paint, I have to really have it be productive time. So when I do feel like a detailed day, when I feel like the day, if there's a day where I'm going to be able to go like this successfully, I'll work on that stuff. So the Raven was a day like that. So I'm like, okay, this is one of these days where I can do details. I'm going to do a Raven. And then there's days when I don't feel like I can do anything successfully. That's when I'll glaze the entire background or do big washes. And almost there. And then that's the complete painting. What else do we want to talk about here? I'd already mentioned, so yeah, this narrative, it's the introduction I read to you, that runs through all the works. This is the final one, so this is the moment before death. I'd hope that in the decision to make a continuous narrative, I also wanted each painting to be able to stand on its own. So I think hopefully with assigning one of the muses to the paintings, and the hope, of course, to make each painting interesting enough that it could stand on its own. And we'll see if that worked. There's two things I wanted to point out in this painting. One is where I get my imagery from. Now that I do have a cell phone that takes pictures and they're free, I take lots of pictures. I pull from those. The young girl in the top corner is a friend of mine's daughter who lives and is being raised on an organic farm outside of Taquini Hot Springs, outside of Whitehorse, that is off the grid, and she lives in a yurt, and she's amazing. She's either going to be the most amazing girl ever or the most dysfunctional girl ever, or maybe both. But she made a costume out of a see-through trash bag and ran around on the farm fighting enemies. The landscape is the Yakutania Point, the place that we go hiking in Skagway. And I thought this might be a good painting to give away a few of the secrets or the meanings of the imagery, and maybe talk a little bit about the way that I think when I make a painting. For example, this painting is Polyhymnia, the agricultural muse. So I chose the ziggurat, the Mesopotamian style pyramid, as a way to reference Dagon, the fertility god, which is referenced by the fish above the ziggurat. And that is a way in my mind to allude to Polyhymnia and her role as an agricultural goddess. And agriculture being a symbol that I thought was worthy of painting, as a reference to the development of civilizations, development of recorded language, and of allowing humans the time to sit around and just think about stuff. So that's about as much as I'll give away. So in all honesty, sometimes the paintings is just throwing things on the canvas because I like them or because I think they look cool. Eventually a story does come out of it, and then I'll grab that story and push that theme and run with it. And in choosing, once that happens, the choosing of the imagery does become a conscious thing, and it might seem nonsensical, but it is planned. And there's the photograph references that I used in that one. Sometimes the picture comes first, and I enjoy it so much that I'll make a painting out of it. Which was this painting here. The way I use language in these paintings, each painting has, it's either a different language or language from a different culture, and I'm not going to stand up here and pretend I speak all those languages, but they were consciously chosen because it had something to do with the theme of the painting. And I liked the short language, just a word or two, just to hint at something inside of the painting. These two, I paired these two together. A couple of reasons. The non-exciting reason is that after receiving the floor plan for the museum, I realized 9 7-foot paintings wasn't going to work. And that it would be actually quite nice to have 2 small squares in the center. And I chose these 2 themes, Melponime and Thalia, because it's comedy and tragedy, and it's a obvious references to the theater. And, what else do we want to talk about here? Getting towards the end. Maybe a little bit about technical information and glazing techniques. So to get a dark, I have stolen Rembrandt's technique of layering sap green, alizarin crimson, and ultramarine blue over and over and over again. And it's a trick, a way to create depth in a painting. If you were say to just paint black, you'd get light swimming down from the sun or the lights in the gallery, hits the black paint, turns right back around after hitting the surface of the black paint, goes back to your eyes, and is registered in what you see as black. If you do 25 layers of sap green, alizarin crimson, and ultramarine blue, what happens is the light swims down and literally swims through all those layers because it's a transparent pigment, which means it allows the light to go through. It goes all the way to the white canvas, which is the opaque color, bounces and swims back to your eyes, and registers as a dark color with an actual history of a journey. And that's a nice way to create depth. What else do I want to talk about? Improvisational collage. These paintings were, really any painting I do is not pre-planned, preconceived. So it's making it up as I go. This painting changed tremendously. It started out as a painting of these 3 characters, hooded with horns on their heads, beating on drums, and ultimately became this. So there's that. There's the Alaskan influence in my work is I probably seen, but the inspiration influence I draw from Alaska is just the way that being in Alaska makes me feel. Much more so than trying to do representational renderings of Alaska, if that makes sense. I think I'm going to kind of close it up. I have a little closing statement, and surprisingly close to the amount of time I was supposed to talk. I didn't even rehearse this. I feel fortunate to be able to walk here in someone else's home. I know the history is difficult, and I don't want to take the gift of being here for granted. I tried to make a kind of a thank you in this series, using subtle allusions and appreciations and offerings without overstepping my position as a guest. Alaska is my home, but I have adopted it. It was not given to me. My greatest hope with painting is to offer you something that will stir up emotion, something that will help you feel human and alive and capable of beauty and creation. At the very least, I hope these paintings ask you to stop for a minute and look closer. If you see something new, a new name or a new word, perhaps you will pause to look it up and learn a new story within our history. Maybe you'll walk right through the gallery and see each one and move on and take it in like a graphic novel. That's cool. Or perhaps it'll all go unseen and I'll just be some weirdo in Skagway painting his heart out because he has no choice. And really that's okay too, because the existence of art only requires creation. To communicate with others is the hope and striving of the creator. It's an afterthought. The power and beauty of art is simply that it exists. Thank you for your time. Thanks. I'm willing to take questions if it's... Yeah, actually, you can ask me anything you want. If it's like, what does that one word mean in that one painting, I will have to reference my notes, which are in my studio at home. But, yeah, if anybody has questions, please.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
Do you normally paint on a white canvas, or do you use a tone canvas?
I hope he'd love you if you talk on the mic.
Oh, yes, microphone, sorry.
Do you usually use a pure white canvas, or do you sometimes tone the canvas first? Or?
I always start with the white canvas. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've toyed around with the idea of tinting the gesso. I thought that might be kind of fun, but really sometimes, so if in the painting, if I want an area, if I want a white area of the painting, it's best to have that original white canvas under it. So that's why I have never messed around with toning the entire thing. Sometimes in building up a certain figure, I'll tone the entire figure, and you can use mineral spirits as an eraser to pull up the highlights. That would be about the closest. Yeah.
Okay, so 2 questions for you here.
Mm-hmm.
Italy, is it 1 painting or 2?
Oh, it was 2 squares. It was 2 separate canvases meant to be shown as 1 painting. Yeah.
Then at what point in your painting career did your favorite paintings become your favorites?
Oh. Maybe a month ago. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I look back on my old work and I think it might have been something there. But I hope to, like, each time I make a new painting, I hope that that's my best painting. More questions? All right, well, thanks.